7th, and we are back on Life with Jason Clemmons, DC. And I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be here every night. So I say the same thing every time, but it's the truth. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to have the opportunity to come share with you the information that we're trying to bring to you. And I'm hoping some of this is helping. I really appreciate the feedback we're getting on the show so far. So I'm hoping this is making a difference in your life. I'm enjoying it myself. So that we're going to try to do a show tonight that is a rerun of what we did on Tuesday. So the first part of this show, if you were listening to us on Tuesday, if you went back and watched some of it on Facebook or YouTube for just a little bit on Tuesday, we had a power outage on our internet, and so we lost everything. We were right in the middle of the show, and then all of a sudden it was gone. So I just really felt like maybe we should redo that show and re-talk about some of that stuff. And it'll be the second time you've heard it this week for some of you, but that's totally okay because I've heard it about 500 times and I love it every single time I hear it. So it'll be good that we get into it. If you guys have any questions and you want to text us, our text line is 806-794-0400, or you can leave some information, or you can leave some questions on the Facebook Live or the YouTube, and we will be able to get those here in the office. And so if you have questions, if there's anything that you'd like to know about, if there's anything that we say that you don't understand, or you want me to stop and redo it, then I can do it again. So we kind of have control over what we're talking about for the next few minutes, hour, I guess, and we'll just get after it. So what we were talking about is the power of food. And one thing I've learned dealing with people, and I said this the other night and I'll say it again, one thing I've learned about dealing with people in food is it's kind of like dealing with, if you had a big table and you had the Baptists and the Methodists and the Presbyterians and the Lutherans and the Catholics all sitting around the table, and you start talking about religion, it wouldn't take very long before people would start getting fussy about things, right? Or in this time of year, you could have Red Raider fans and Oregon fans and Texas Longhorn fans and Oklahoma fans, and then start talking about football, and it wouldn't take very long before everybody started getting fussy about things. So the one thing that I know about food is that there's 7 point something billion people on the planet, and all of them have an opinion on what we should eat. And so when you start talking about food, you start stepping on people's toes, and people start getting fussy about food. And so I'm not saying that you should eat or you shouldn't eat something, or I'm not telling you what to eat. I'm simply sharing information with you so that you can make the best decision for yourself. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to help you make the best decision for yourself. And sometimes you just don't know the data. And sometimes you just don't realize what food is all about. And so I hope as we go through this show and we kind of break it all down for you, that you'll feel better about making choices that for you and your family when it comes to food. So we'll just get started, because one of the things that we talk about, we see somebody and we say to ourselves, man, if they're skinny, they're healthy. And I think we're kind of getting to that point where we start to understand that that's not really a true statement. Being skinny doesn't make you healthy. There's all kinds of people out there and I've got examples that we use here in the office all the time. Patrick Swayze is one of them. He was probably the stubbiest looking, fittest looking dude that there was around, and he died at 57 from pancreas cancer. And you can go down the list of all the different celebrities that Farrah Fawcett's one of them. She was one of the stubbiest looking women around back in the day, and she died at 62 from colon cancer. And you can go to real skinny people like Heath Ledger, and you can say, man, if you see pictures of Heath, he was a skinny guy, but he wasn't healthy. And so one of the things that's really disappointing is when people, their whole goal with losing weight is their whole goal with being healthy is just to lose weight. And it's like the worst thing that you want to do is to be skinny and sick. It doesn't make any difference if you lose all this weight and you end up sick in the end. It's not good. And that's how I started this whole journey back in 2009. I had a banker that came to me, and he was a thin guy, didn't have hardly any body fat. He had run like 5 miles 3 times a week for 40 years or something. He he was retired. He came into the office and he had cancer all over his body. And he just looked at me and he said, "Jason, why did this happen to me?" And I was like, "I don't know. You're supposed to be the one that's supposed to be healthy. You did all the things that they say to do to be healthy, and you end up with cancer on your all over your body." And it wasn't very long after that when he passed away. And so it was really disappointing. It was like what, I didn't have an answer for that. And so I started studying nutrition back in 2009, and we've been doing this power of food class in our office ever since 2009. And if, some of you that are listening, you may have heard it before, but for all the new people, this is part of what we do, because it's really important to really kind of deep dive into some of the things that we study to make us healthy. And one of the quotes that I have here is from Dr. James Chestnut at the Wellness Practice, and he's a chiropractor from Canada, and he's a really smart guy. And one of his quotes says, "There's not a single study ever published to validate the concept that human beings are genetically or innately programmed to develop chronic illness. All available research indicates that humans are innately genetically programmed for homeostasis and health." And what does that mean, really? Well, what that whole quote means is that the cell is designed to express health. And if you put a bunch of cells together, then you get tissues. And if you put tissues together, then you get organs. And if you put organs together, then you get organ systems. And organ systems is what we're made out of. And so organisms. And so it's like you can break this down to the health of the cell. If you put the cell in an environment that's congruent with health, the cell will express health. If you put your body in an environment that's congruent with health, you will get health. If you put your body in an environment that's incongruent with health, you will get symptoms, and then you will get disease. And that's kind of what that's the foundation of these ideas. And if you look at the top 10 leading causes of death in the United States, it's always the same: heart disease and cancer, right up there on the top. Chronic lower respiratory disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, diabetes, which we covered Alzheimer's last night, influenza, pneumonia, kidney disease, suicide. So the 7 of the top 10 leading causes of death are all chronic disease, and we don't have any evidence that our body should create chronic disease. It's something that we're doing to ourselves. And if it's something that we're doing to ourselves, maybe we could stop it and we could make it better and make it go away. So when we look at the different things, well, and some people say, well, it's genetics. But there's been some research and some presentations to the U.S. Congress that summarize that many of the studies concluded that only 2 to 3% of all cancers could be attributed to genes. It's not the genetics, it's the epigenetics, or the environment that's upon the genetics, that causes the genetics to express itself in a certain way. And we're going to get into some of that as we go through this tonight, and so that we can kind of see exactly what that means and how that works. And I want to remind us that any toxicity or deficiency in relation to the innate genetic environmental requirements causes the body to enter the stress response and results in a lack of homeostasis or health. So when you're toxic or you're deficient, and that's one of the things that when I was in chiropractic school, that's one of the sentences that I remember that I heard someone say, that all diseases are caused from too little or too much of something. You either have too little or too much of something, and that's what makes you sick. And the stress response has 5 phases. The stress response has an alarm, then we try to adapt, and then we fatigue, and then we get sick, and then we die. And so, like, if it's hot in this room, my body will detect that as an alarm, and then it will try to adapt. So what's it going to do when it tries to adapt? It's going to start to sweat. That's the way I would adapt, so I can dissipate some of this heat off of myself. So I'm going to try to adapt to my environment. And if I have a genetic code that tells me how to adapt, I know how to adapt to heat. I sweat, right? But what if that alarm is something like aspartame? And aspartame wasn't in existence when my genetic code was made. And there's no adapting to aspartame. So what happens is I get the alarm, I try to adapt. I go back to my genome. I go back to my code. I look in the owner's manual of how to run a cell, and I say, hey, how am I supposed to adapt to this? And it's not there. And I look and I look and I look and I look, and pretty soon I'm tired of looking, and now I'm fatigued. And then what's next? I'm going to get sick. So when a patient comes to me and there's like, doc, by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm tired. Like there's nothing left. What that tells me is they have an alarm in their environment that they are unable to adapt to, that it's not going to be very long before they get sick because they're already tired. They're going to get sick and then they're going to die. If the cell dies, that's the first thing. Then if you get enough cells to die, then your tissues die. And if you get enough tissues to die, then your organs die, and then the organism dies, and that's a bad thing right there. So we really want to try to we want to stay out of our stress response. So when it comes to food, we really ask the question, why do we eat? Why do we eat? If you think about that, why do we eat? Well, most of the time, it's not because we're hungry. Most of the time, we eat because it's like, well, I don't know, it's 6 o'clock. We're supposed to eat. Like we're having supper. Mom's got supper on the table. Time to eat. It's lunchtime. It's 12 o'clock. Everybody's taking a break. Yeah, well, let's go get lunch. Let's eat. We're going out to dinner tonight. It's like, well, what if I'm not hungry? Well, we're going out to dinner anyway, right? Most of the times it has to do with our social life and time on a clock, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we're hungry. But if you ask ourselves, why should we eat? That's when we get into the reason is to get the essential nutrients inside our body so that we can function the way we're supposed to. So otherwise we would starve, right? So that's, if we think about food and we think about what we're doing with it, we really want to know, we should think about, man, I'm trying to get nutrients into my body so that my body can function properly. And every bite that we take is either moving us towards health or it's moving us towards sickness. Now, you may have a ways to go before you get to sickness. This may not be really early, but every bite we take is moving us in one direction or the other. And so we really can think about that. You take enough of those bites that move you towards sickness, and it's not very long until you're sick. If you take enough of those bites that move you towards health, it's not very long until you're healthy. So it's really an option. Well, a lot of times with the food that we eat to move us in one direction or the other. And I don't think we think about that sometimes because everybody's always talking about moderation, just eat in moderation. And it's like, no, it's not true. I don't believe that. I don't think it's right. I think it's a cop out to defend an argument, right? It's not, we don't want to do, we only argue for moderation on the things that we are trying to make the argument that we want to eat. We don't say, well, just only eat broccoli in moderation. I've never heard anybody say that. I never heard anybody argue that they should eat in moderation. Hang on 1 second. Yes. Thanks. Hey, that's live right there. Got a phone call from my wife in the middle of the show. She knows I'm in the middle of the show, and so there must have been some sort of either a mistake or emergency. And thank goodness there was not an emergency. It was just a mistake. So no problem. We're back on track. So let's talk about what is food. How do we break down food? Well, food breaks down into carbohydrates, proteins, or fats. Those are the three main building blocks. When you start to think about how am I going to put a plate together? How am I going to put a meal together? These are the things. When you go into a restaurant, that's exactly what they've done. They've decided how they're going to put a carb, a protein, and a fat together. And so let's go through those just for a second and talk about exactly what those are, because some of those get a bad rap, right? So what is a carbohydrate? And because people are always talking about, man, that's a bad, like, I don't want, carbs are bad for me, right? And everybody says that sometimes. There's all kinds of stuff going on nowadays about all kinds of different keto diets and carnivore diets and all the things like that. But a carbohydrate is what a plant, it's what we get from plants. And what a plant does is it takes carbon dioxide out of the air, and then carbon dioxide is carbon and oxygen, and then it takes the oxygen and it cuts off the carbon and it releases the oxygen, and then it takes water and it adds the water to the carbon. It hydrates the carbon, and what we end up with is a carbohydrate. And our body uses that for energy so that we can function. Now, we got one little molecule of carbohydrate, and what we're going to do is we're going to put it together in a long chain. And when we put it together in a long chain, we're going to make either a complex carbohydrate or we're going to make a simple carbohydrate. And I'll show you that here in just a minute, or we'll talk about that here in just a minute. So carbohydrates are used in structures such as DNA for the proper burning of fat, to eliminate toxins and excess cholesterol from the body, and are vital for the growth and beneficial bacteria that live in our intestines. Without carbohydrates, you wouldn't be able to think, move, breathe, or even be alive. And there's arguments about that, but I'm telling you, what I try to bring to you is foundational truths of health that you can build on the rock, that you can live out your life with. And when I study longevity on the planet, it's usually people from the Mediterranean, and it's people from Okinawa, and they're the ones that live long, healthy lives. They're always in the lead, and they don't go carb free. They just usually go complex carbs is what they do. And so that's what a carbohydrate is. It's carbon that's hydrated, put together in a chain, and we'll break that down in here just a second. So what is a protein? Well, a protein is a structure made from the building blocks, what we call amino acids. And the body uses proteins for building muscle, bone, skin, hormones, enzymes, antibodies, and more. It also uses proteins to maintain fluid balance and pH and make neurotransmitters in our brain. So we really do need the proteins in order to function. Our bodies utilize 22 of those amino acids that we know of. 8 are considered to be essential for most adults, which means that they have to come from the diet. Your body doesn't make them. And sometimes I've even seen studies that maybe there's 9 essential amino acids, but those are the things that you have to get from your diet. So you need to eat proteins in some form or fashion in order to keep yourself healthy, right? So what is a fat? Fats are made from a building block called fatty acids. And the 2 of them that I want to talk about tonight are linoleic acid, which is omega-6, and alpha linolenic acid, which is omega-3. And I know some of these names are big, but I know that I'm not that smart. So I learned them, and I learned what they meant, and I learned how they function in my body, and I learned some of the things that they do. And so I'm not going to talk to you like you're in kindergarten. I think some of these things that you can know, that you can understand, and so I'm going to use them when I can. So those are the alpha linolenic acid is an omega-3 fatty acid is considered to be essential, which means we got to get it, and where we get it from is mostly from fish. But saturated fats means that the fat is saturated with a hydrogen, which means it's very stable. It's normally solid at room temperature and at body temperature, and it doesn't react well with oxygen. An unsaturated fat is different. It doesn't have, it has one or more double bonds, which means it's not saturated, and it really gets damaged with heat, light, and oxygen. And so that's one of the things, like with vegetable oils, and like they say, you get trans fats, right? And that's not good. And that's what you get whenever you add heat, light, or oxygen to an oil. That's why when you buy olive oil in the store, it's usually in a dark green bottle, right? Or Lay's potato chips, they come in a silver lined bottle, and so it's like no trans fats. And it's like, oh, yeah. I mean, they come in a silver lined bag, but that's why they do that, because when you take that and you put it on the shelf and the light from the grocery store hits it, it will turn those unsaturated fats, and it will cause them to become rancid or come into some free radicals that really basically cause problems in our body. So that's kind of the difference in the fats. We've been taught that to eat a balanced diet, that's what we need to do. We need to eat a balanced diet, but not in moderation. The moderation depends on how we define it, right? What we want to do is make sure that the foods that we're eating, we want to eat a balanced diet, but we want to eat that balanced diet from carbs, proteins, and fats. And we want to eat it with healthy pieces of each one of those. So we want healthy carbs, healthy proteins, and healthy fats. That's the balance that we need. And then we want to eat those pretty much however we want to eat those, right? So there's two nutritional causes that I really want to get in tonight about chronic stress, and that's omega-6 imbalance, omega-6-3 imbalance, and insulin resistance. So let's break down some of the thoughts behind those two main things. And we're going to talk about the difference in carbohydrates. And so when we talked about how the plant takes a carbon and hydrates it and makes a carbohydrate, then it puts those in chains. And when you have a very small, simple chain, then your body can break it down really fast. It's kind of like one of those kids' toys, the little puzzles that the kids have that has the little yellow peg on it, and it's got the tractor and the cow and the farmer, and you give it to like a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, and it takes them 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, and then they can figure out exactly where all the pieces go like that. Well, if you gave a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old or a 15-year-old a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle of some field in the fall somewhere back east, like Nashville or in the South, where you got a bunch of trees turning orange and brown, and the grass is brown, and there's some old broke down thoroughbred out there in the pasture somewhere, right? If you were to look at a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle like that, then they would be complicated to put together. Well, carbohydrates are pretty much the same way when you break them down. There's simple carbohydrates that are very quickly broken down, and when they're very quickly broken down, the glucose that comes from them, the blood sugar that comes from them, goes into the bloodstream really quickly, and now it makes your insulin rise. And a complex carbohydrate takes a long time to get broken down. That's where we get our vegetables, and it takes a long time to get broken down, and then it takes very little glucose into the bloodstream at a time, which means we don't get an increase in insulin. And that's what we're really trying to control, is we're trying to control our insulin. So it's really important. Simple carbohydrates are things like glucose, fructose, and galactose. And you get glucose from things like white bread, and you get fructose from things like high fructose corn syrup or fruit or alcohol, whiskey, that type of thing. That's refined like corn, that fermented corn. That's where we get fructose from. Disaccharides, when you put glucose and fructose together, you end up with sucrose, which is table sugar. So table sugar is 50% glucose and 50% fructose. And as soon as you put it inside your body, it breaks in half. And fructose to the body is considered a toxin. Fructose goes straight to the liver and is only metabolized in the liver. And when you put too much fructose in the liver, you end up with a problem. And so when you take table sugar and you eat it, as soon as it hits your stomach and that acid hits it, it's going to break it in half. And then you're going to end up with 50% of that's glucose that's used by all the cells in your body, and 50% of it is fructose, which is only going to be metabolized in the liver. And if you want to go to one of our websites, therockhealthywellness.com, we have a video there by Robert Lustig called Sugar, the Bitter Truth. And it's a little complicated, but it's a super great video that explains exactly what fructose does in the liver. And he explains how fructose is exactly, if you have fructose, it's the same thing. A cup of soda, a cup of orange juice, and a cup of whiskey has the same effect on the liver. Everybody knows the whiskey causes liver problems and cirrhosis of the liver, but they don't realize that the orange juice, apple juice, whatever that's fructose, or the sodas are all causing that same problem in the liver. And what you end up with is an inflammatory problem right there. So that's the complex carbohydrates, is when we put a bunch of those together. And that's what we have to break down a complex carbohydrate into one of those simple carbohydrates in order for us to get it into the bloodstream. And so it takes a long time for that to happen. And so we want to make sure that we're eating complex carbohydrates from vegetables, and that's where we get our carbohydrate load, and not refined carbohydrates like white bread or even white potatoes or white pasta, any of that stuff that's refined sugars. That's we really don't want to do that. We are coming up on a break on the radio station, so we're going to take this break here in just about 5 seconds, and then we'll come back live with you guys on the radio. And so stay tuned. We'll be right back. If you're on the Facebook page, we're just going to keep going on this because I want you guys to have this information, and I'll catch some of the people up on the show. I want to check and make sure if anybody's got any questions that we have the text line going. So if you want to text in a question, or if you don't understand something that we talked about so far, and if you're watching the show back later, because I know a lot of people are, I know I'm competing with lots of things tonight. We got the Chiefs football game and all kinds of stuff going on out there tonight. I want to make sure that if you have a question, that you can come back anytime and you can listen to that at a later time. Um, you can ask me a question on Facebook. I will try to respond to all of those questions on Facebook, even if you come back later and watch this show at a later time. So if there's something that you don't understand or something that you want to talk about, feel free to do that. I'll try to pay attention to it and make sure that you are getting all the information that you need. But let's get back to talking about some of this stuff. So whenever we eat refined carbohydrates, what we get, or when we eat complex carbohydrates, we're going to end up with glucose in the bloodstream. Now, the glucose in the bloodstream is going to be very slow whenever we're eating a complex carbohydrate, but it's going to go really fast if we're eating a simple carbohydrate or a refined carbohydrate. And glucose is blood sugar, and our body needs glucose in order to function properly. So we got to make sure that we get that. Whenever we have an excess amount of glucose, our pancreas will release insulin, and insulin is going to help us pull that blood sugar out of the bloodstream. And that's really important because we got to get that glucose out of the bloodstream. And I'm going to break it down in just a second, but as soon as we get back from the break on the radio station, I'm going to break down exactly how that happens. And so, but one thing I wanted to kind of explain is that insulin helps get glucose out of the bloodstream. And I'm going to show you the insulin receptor, and I'm going to show you how that works. But not all cells of the body need insulin to get glucose out of the bloodstream into the cell. There's two main cell types that don't need insulin receptors, and those are the cells of the small blood vessels and the unmyelinated nerve cells. And unmyelinated nerve cells carry pain. And so those two cells right there, they don't need the insulin. So it doesn't matter if you're diabetic or you're not diabetic, or it doesn't matter if you're insulin resistant or you're not insulin resistant. If you have an increased amount of blood sugar, you will get diffusion through the cell wall into those cells. And when you get diffusion and it goes through there, what you're going to end up with is sorbitol. It's going to save that sugar inside the blood, inside the cell as sorbitol. And that's going to bring water with it, which is going to make those cells swell up. And it's just going to happen by diffusion. It's kind of like if you burn some toast, which none of you are going to do anymore because you're not going to eat toast. I get it. But back in the old days, if you burn toast in the kitchen, you could smell burned toast in your bedroom, right? Because the smoke, the smell from the burned toast just diffused through the house, and it went all the way through, right? And so that's the difference between diffusion and actually having to have a cell receptor like insulin receptor to get that across. Welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is Life with Jason Clemmons, DC, and you guys are listening to me on 98.7 Walk by Faith Radio, and then you're following us on Facebook or YouTube or X, formerly known as Twitter. And so I appreciate you guys listening. We're in the middle of a show talking about the power of food, and I want to try to close the gap on some of this over the next few minutes because we got a lot to cover right here. But just remember that the body needs glucose is the what blood sugar is in the body. The body needs glucose in order to function, and we got to control that glucose. And if we have too much of it, that causes problems. So I want to get into exactly what that means. Okay. So you have a resting blood sugar somewhere between 80 and 100, hopefully, right? So if your resting blood sugar is 80 at 100, and then all of a sudden you eat 2 saltine crackers, those 2 saltine crackers are going to increase your blood sugar to about 180. Well, that blood sugar is going to, that blood is going to travel through the pancreas. And when that happens, what happens with that is this. It's like you've got a blood vessel, and then that blood is going to travel through the pancreas, and the pancreas is going to determine, is there an appropriate amount of glucose in the bloodstream? Well, if it's between 80 and 100, then the pancreas is fine with it. But then when you have 2 saltine crackers and it goes up to 180, then what happens is now there's an alarm that's set off inside the pancreas because our little gauge between empty and full goes to full. And the pancreas says, wait a minute, that's too much glucose. We don't need to put that much glucose in the bloodstream. Because what happens when you add sugar to something? When you add sugar to something, it makes it thick and sticky, right? And if your heart has to pump thick, sticky blood, it's really hard on your heart. And the further you go away from your heart, the smaller the blood vessels get. So you get these little tiny blood vessels that has this thick, sticky blood that's causing the blood to clog up, right? And then what we end up with a bypass system. And so there's 2 things happening at once right there. We're getting thick, sticky blood because we got too much sugar in it, when at the same exact time, we've got the sugar diffusing through those small vessel walls, the cells in those small blood vessels that don't need insulin. That's just diffusing right through the wall, and it's swelling those up because the water is following that, and it's causing those little blood vessels to swell up. And now you can't get the red blood cells through there. And one of the things that you'll notice, like on your feet or your thighs, or sometimes you'll start to see little red blood vessels. Like you'll see the blood vessels in your feet. They'll see the little tiny blood vessels. And what that is that's the blood those red blood cells getting stuck in that little capillary, that little bitty tiny blood vessel, and it's not being able to get through there. And what will happen is now the body has the bypass system of that, and it bypasses the rest of the blood through there, and it just sends it on back through the bloodstream. And that causes you not to be able to absorb the nutrients into the tissues. And when you can't get the nutrients to the tissue, the red blood cell carries oxygen. And when you can't get the oxygen into the tissue, then the nerve is going to die. And so you've got the unmyelinated nerve cell that's full of water, that's very deformed, and it's set off like that. So you try to put your foot on the ground and your foot hurts like crazy. You've got a neuropathy because that is swollen up right there because the blood sugar was so high it just diffused through the wall, area of high concentration or low concentration. And then at the same time, now we've got this thick, sticky blood that's going on. So the pancreas is kind of like the gauge to that. So when that blood flows through the pancreas and that blood is at 180, that sets off an alarm in the pancreas, and the pancreas is going to release insulin. And then the blood's going to flow through, and the insulin's going to help pull the glucose out of the bloodstream. And then the blood's going to flow back through the body, it's going to flow back through the pancreas, and then it's going to be back to normal, and the pancreas is going to stop the insulin, and then everything's going to be happy right there. But we're going to do it quickly. The problem arises is what happens when we do that over and over and over again in a day, right? So we've got a blood cell. I mean, we've got glucose in the bloodstream, and the glucose in the bloodstream is at 100, And then all of a sudden it goes up to 180, goes through the pancreas. Pancreas releases insulin. Insulin helps get the glucose out of the bloodstream. Everything goes back to normal. Well, we wake up in the morning and we eat some sort of sugar-filled breakfast. We have a piece of toast and jelly. We have some sort of sugar-filled cereal. We have some sort of tart with icing on the top of it. We go get a donut, right? What are we doing? We're filling our bloodstream up with really thick, sticky blood, which is setting off the insulin alarm. And then about 10 o'clock, we got to have a snack of some kind. We got to get some peanut butter crackers or something like that. So we set off the insulin alarm. Then we go to lunch and have a hamburger and french fries, and we set off the insulin alarm. Then we get to the afternoon, we got to have some sort of candy bar or something to get us through the afternoon, and we set off the insulin alarm. And then we go home, and hey, it's busy tonight, y'all. Hey, we got a ball game on. We got kids going to ball practice. We got kids going to dance. We got kids going to theater. We're running all over the place. We've been working all day. Let's just get a pizza. Let's just stop and get a burrito. It won't be any big deal. We'll eat something at the ballpark, right? All that stuff's going to be crap. So we hit that insulin receptor again. And then right before bed, we got to get us that bowl of ice cream. We just got to have that midnight snack right before we go to bed, right? And that's what we've done right there is we've hit that receptor over and over and over again. And now we've really got a problem. And the cell wall doesn't like that. The cell wall has that insulin receptor on it. And if you hit that insulin receptor over and over and over again, kind of like a handicap button going into like Kohl's or Dillard's, if you hit the handicap button, the door opens. But if you just sit there and pound on that, and pound on that, and pound on that, and pound on that, pretty soon you're going to break that little handicap button and you're not going to be able to open the door. And that's called insulin resistance. When you hit that insulin receptor that's on the cell wall over and over and over again, the cell wall will reach up, the cell will reach up and take that cell wall off, that receptor off of that cell wall. And when that happens, you're not going to be able to use insulin to open the glucose gate because the glucose gate is too small and you need the insulin to open the glucose gate so that you get the glucose into the cell and store it for later. But if you lose that ability right there to with the insulin receptor, then now you got insulin resistance and you really got a problem because you can't get the blood sugar down. You can't get the glucose out of the bloodstream because when it flows back through the pancreas is going to set off another alarm and it's going to release more insulin. And when it releases more insulin, now you're going to have even twice as much insulin hitting those receptors, which is going to downregulate those receptors even more. And now we've got this serious problem because we can't get the glucose down. And another problem we have for that is what happens at night after you've eaten. So you're gonna eat supper, then you're gonna go to bed, and somewhere in the middle of the night, your blood sugar is gonna start to drop. So you're gonna eat supper, it's gonna take it up higher, insulin's gonna be released, we're gonna suck glucose out of the bloodstream, but somewhere in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, what's gonna happen is that blood is gonna flow through that pancreas and it's going to be somewhere down around 70. It gets down there 80, 70. That sets off an alarm inside the pancreas, and the pancreas now releases a hormone called glucagon. And glucagon tells the liver to make new glucose. So now the liver is going to start to make new glucose and pour it into the bloodstream. And so that's going to make the blood sugar go up. So it's going to go from 70 to 80 to 90 to 100 to 110 to 120 to 130. And that's going to flow back through the pancreas. And the pancreas is going to say, okay, liver, stop. So how does the pancreas tell the liver to stop making glucose? It releases insulin. And it releases insulin, and that's the way that the pancreas communicates to the liver. But what happens if the liver has become insulin resistant? The liver will just keep dumping sugar all night long. It'll keep dumping glucose into the bloodstream. And it'll do that all night long. And you'll wake up in the morning and you'll check your glucose level and it'll be 300. And you'll be like, I don't understand. I haven't had anything to eat since last night. Well, that's because your liver is now insulin resistant. And that is a really, really big problem when your liver becomes insulin resistant, because you can't stop that process. And that really becomes a problem for us. Insulin resistance causes all kinds of problems in the body. Glucose and vitamin C are almost identical. In fact, vitamin C is made from glucose, and they both use the same membrane receptors to enter the cell, so they compete for absorption. The phagocytic cells of the immune system require high amounts of vitamin C to work properly. Everybody knows that. When you get sick, take some vitamin C, right? Right now, everybody's kind of getting sniffles. Everybody's worried about all this virus that might be coming at us, right? And then what we do is we increase our vitamin C to make sure our immune system's functioning properly. Blood sugar of 120 decreases phagocytic index by 75%. An increase of blood sugar decreases the immune system. So does it make any sense to go home and eat chicken noodle soup and drink a Coke when you're sick? It doesn't make any sense at all. That's not what you should do. You should not be increasing your blood sugar whenever you're sick like that. It's going to decrease your immune system. Insulin is involved in the storage of magnesium, and that helps muscles relax and is a cofactor for almost all energy-producing reactions. So if you can't store magnesium, you can't get your muscles to relax, you end up with high blood pressure. Insulin causes the retention of sodium, which increases fluid in the body, which increases high blood pressure. Insulin also stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight response. So now when you increase your insulin for too much insulin resistance, now we get the sympathetic stress and the stress response. Now we get fatigued, right? We were alarmed. We tried to adapt. We couldn't adapt. Now we get tired. I'm just tired. I'm tired all the time, right? It's not a good thing. Exercise and movement deficiency has also been shown to cause insulin resistance. We've got to be able to get out there and move, and we got to be able to get out there and exercise. Otherwise, that we're going to have a serious problem. So the first cells that become insulin resistant are our liver cells. And that's really a bad problem when we can't do that, because then we can't stop ourselves from making glucose in the night, and then blood sugar gets high. And then when the liver runs out of stored glucose, which we call glycogen, when the liver runs out of stored glucose, well, it will send out a signal to the rest of the body, and it says, hey, send me your glucose. And what do we get? We get centripetal obesity. We get where our legs are small, our shoulders and arms are small, but we get that big belly around the middle of us. And that means we're starting to get fat around all of our organs. And we get fat around our organs, that becomes a serious problem. And our organs will start to malfunction, and we'll really get into a problem with that. The next are the muscle cells, and then the fat cells. So those are kind of the order of how we get insulin resistance. Your muscles burn sugar. They burn glucose whenever you work out. When you lift weights and you stress those muscles, you will burn the sugar that's in the muscle. So what will happen? The muscle over the next 24 hours or 36 hours or whatever will start to pull that glucose out of the bloodstream, and it will get it back into the muscle. Well, in order to do that, you got to have insulin. You got to be functioning with insulin. If you're insulin resistant, you can't do that. So that really becomes a problem right there. And so insulin resistance increases osteoporosis. The liver converts T4 to T3, which is inactive thyroid, to active thyroid. And if the liver's not working properly because it's working on making glucose all the time, then your thyroid hormone gets all messed up. Insulin is involved in the regulation of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So now your sex hormones are going to get all messed up. High insulin causes increased aging. You can look at a person who's got an insulin-resistant problems and they look old. Their skin is wrinkled, their face is wrinkled, their hair is gray. They don't look healthy. They don't look energetic, and they don't look healthy. So insulin resistance is really a bad problem. And there was a Dr. Kempner at Duke University who put diabetic patients on a diet high in complex carbohydrates. Within 3 months, most patients on his diet experienced a significant decrease in blood pressure, blood sugar, weight, insulin requirements, cholesterol, sugar in the urine, and protein in the urine. And that study was done and backed up by the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, the British Medical Journal, Diabetes Care, Lancet, and others. They all have confirmed Dr. Kempner's work. And Dr. Kempner's study, when he did this, he was in 1958. So eating healthy is not a new idea. And putting people on complex carbohydrates and getting them to come back to health is not a new idea. It's been going on for a long time. And if you start doing that, if you start eating the way you're supposed to start eating, it won't take you 24 hours before you start feeling better. So it's really important that we get our nutrition right and we understand what it is that we're eating. So I'm gonna go through this because I want to get to the omega-3s tonight, and I know we're running out of time. So I'm going to go through some of this stuff, and I'm not going to cover all the breakdown of the proteins tonight, but I do want to get into the omega-6-3 ratio and understand exactly why that's so important. And so the two essential fatty acids that we need is omega-6 and omega-3s. And the way that works is we really want a 3-to-1 or less ratio between omega-6 and omega-3. And you can take a blood test to check your omega-6-3 ratio. We do it all the time here in our office. So if you want to come by and do it, we can do it for you. It costs $60 to do the test by itself, and we can come in and do that for you. So if you want to get your 6-3 ratio checked, just call the office and I'll do that for you. And so, because what you want to know is, do I have a 6-3 ratio that's under 5? Or do I have a 6-3 ratio that's way over 10? The average American is 25-1. I've had patients in the office in the 30s and the 40s. I've even had one that was 85. And she got her 85 6-3 ratio down to 2.9. She went from 85 to 2.9 in about 6 weeks. So that's something that's you can change really quickly if you just start getting your fish oil and your omega-3s into your body. So when you eat omega-6 fatty acids, when you eat omega-6s in things like corn, cottonseed, sunflower, safflower, peanuts, soy, canola, those are things that are high in omega-6s. And I'm not saying omega-6s are bad for you. I'm saying the ratio being out of control is bad for us. So whenever we eat omega-6s, what happens is our body turns that into this acid that's, the abbreviation is DHGLA. And when we have this enzyme called delta-6 desaturase, just follow me on this. I know it's complicated, but just listen to what I'm saying. We have a little specific enzyme that when we eat omega-6s, it pushes that DHGLA to this other little thing called a prostaglandin, and that makes it, that's anti-inflammatory, and it's a vasodilator, which means it opens our blood vessels and decreases our blood pressure. So a little bit of omega-6s is good for us when we have delta-6 desaturase. But if we have insulin, when we get the omega-6, we are not going to get delta-6 desaturase. We're going to get delta-5 desaturase. And that's going to change things. So if we eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, we're going to, on white bread, right? Which we feed our kids and we grow up on, right? And we're the sickest society in the history of mankind. There's never been a society in the history of mankind that's more sick than Americans are today. And they say, well, we all grew up on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And look at us today. We're the sickest in the history of mankind, right? So when we eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, what happens? We got white bread and jelly that's going to increase our blood sugar quickly because both of those are refined carbohydrates. And then we're going to have peanut butter, which is 4,400-1 omega-6 to omega-3. We want a 3-to-1 ratio, but what we're going to get is 4,400-1 with a high level of insulin. And so what we're going to end up with is arachidonic acid. And our body makes some arachidonic acid, but we can also get it from eating things. And so we get arachidonic acid and we get too much arachidonic acid. It's the same thing we get. The number one source of arachidonic acid is grain-fed meat. When you feed a cow corn, a cow doesn't have delta-6 desaturase. So a cow is going to turn corn into arachidonic acid. And then you're going to eat that piece of meat, and it's going to be high in arachidonic acid. And then your body is going to take these little enzymes called COX enzymes, and it's going to turn that arachidonic acid into a different kind of prostaglandin, which is going to cause inflammation. That's PGE2. And that's going to cause inflammation in the body. So when we eat omega-6s in excess with insulin, with increased blood sugar, we end up with inflammation in the body. And that inflammation causes all kinds of problems: scar tissue, pain, free radicals, increased blood pressure, immune system dysfunction, heart disease. We get all kinds of problems right there. So we really don't want to do that. Whenever we eat omega-3 fatty acids, that's where we get EPA and DHA. And EPA and DHA is what we get from, the main source of that is fish. And if you look at where all the people are on the planet, the majority of people on the planet live on the coast. And why do they live on the coast? Because that's where the fish were. And people have been eating fish since there was people. And that's how our bodies function, is on that EPA and that DHA. EPA is an anti-inflammatory, and the DHA helps our brain build synapses and helps us with serotonin and dopamine. And so it's essential that we get that EPA, we get enough EPA and DHA, and we decrease our amount of arachidonic acid. So when we eat corn or soy, what we end up with is arachidonic acid. COX enzymes turns that into prostaglandins, and we get inflammation. What happens if you take an a COX enzyme or a COX inhibitor like Vioxx or Celebrex? It's a COX inhibitor. Well, then your JV team kicks in, and the LOX enzymes show up, and they turn that into a leukotriene, and that ends up with inflammation. When you eat too many sixes, it doesn't matter how you slice it, you're going to end up with inflammation. And then if you eat EPA with your fish oil, you will balance your inflammation. And you can decrease your inflammation in your body. And inflammation in your body causes all kinds of problems. And I'm going to try, I've got like 3 minutes. I'm going to try to break this down. Imagine a cell. Inside a cell, you have different organelles. You have different parts of that cell. You have a mitochondria, you have peroxisomes, you have an endoplasmic reticulum, you have lysosomes, you have different parts inside the cell. The one that it's important is to look at that mitochondria. And the first thing we want to look at is we want to look at the cell wall. The cell wall is made up of omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I know this is so important. I'm just going to pick this up. I know we've only got a few minutes. We got about 2.5 minutes on the show, on the radio station. And I don't want to rush through this whole 6:3 ratio thing, because I know it's so important. And I know we tried to do this on Tuesday, but that's exactly how we'll start the show off tomorrow night. We will start the show off, and we will break down why the 6:3 ratio is so important. Because if anybody's listening to the show, or you come back later and listen to the show, I don't want you to miss that. It's really a really big deal. So one of the things, so how do we eat? What do we eat? What do we eat to get healthy? What we eat is we eat complex carbohydrates. That's the first thing. If you want to eat, and look at, like on Wednesday night, last night we broke down the End of Alzheimer's book. And what did Dr. Bredesen say? Dr. Bredesen said, eat complex carbohydrates. Dr. Hyman's he's got a functional medicine practice in Massachusetts or something like that. He's one of the most well-known functional medicine people, which is really cool for us because wellness chiropractors have been doing functional medicine for a long time. We just don't call it medicine. We call it wellness, right? But those guys both said, eat complex carbohydrates. So that's the first thing that I'm going to present for your consideration is eat complex carbohydrates. And you get those from vegetables. The second thing that you want to eat is you want to eat grass-fed meat. If you're going to eat meat at all, and you want to eat meat, eat wild grass-fed meat. When you feed a cow grass, that cow is an omega-3 meat. When you feed a cow corn, that cow is an omega-6 meat. So that's really a big deal right there. And then the next thing is nuts and berries, a little bit of fruit, and no sugar. Those are the things. Complex carbohydrates, grass-fed meats, wild free-range chickens, wild fish, nuts and berries, and a little bit of sugar. A little bit of fruit and no sugar. And I know that was crazy, and we'll go over that again tomorrow night, and we'll go over that on the Facebook page so that you can make sure that you get it. I want to thank everybody for listening to the show, and I hope that you're getting something out of this. About 1,000 more of these shows, and I'll be really good at it, I think. So we're just going to keep practicing, and if we can give you something that helps you or your family be better, that's exactly what we want to do. So if you have questions and you have questions later, if you're listening to the show on the radio and you want to come back and watch it on the Facebook Live, just come to the Rock Health and Wellness Centers and you can get it there. And then you can ask me questions. If you haven't texted us something, then you can come and watch it live on any of those channels, and I'll answer your questions for you. You guys have a great night. I'll be back tomorrow night at 6. Okay, I'm going to finish this up on the Facebook page, and then I'm going to get to that omega-3 deal tomorrow night. I just didn't want to leave that. I just didn't want to rush that through that right there, right? So what do we eat? We eat complex carbohydrates. Eat your vegetables. Your mom has been telling you that your whole life. Eat your vegetables. Look at the glycemic load of the vegetables. The things that you want to stay away from is like white vegetables. White potatoes is not something that we want to do. We want to get away from that. Sweet potatoes are okay. Purple potatoes are actually the best. But get into your asparagus and your broccoli and your cauliflower. Those are things that are good for you. The second thing is eat wild meat. One of the things that's crazy is in that my whole life in deer season, we get to this type of year and I see deer corn everywhere. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. Like feeding a deer corn, which turns that deer in from an omega-3 deer into an omega-6 deer, and then harvesting the deer and eating the deer doesn't make any sense at all. So you want to eat wild grass-fed animals. You want to eat wild caught fish. You want to eat free-range chickens. So it's wild meat. If you're going to eat meat, I don't think there's any problem with eating meat, and I think if you eat wild meat, you'll do fine. What you want to eat is you want to eat berries over fruit. So berries have very little sugar. So raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, blackberries, berries are better for you than fruits are. I'm not saying fruits are bad for you, but I'm saying if you want to control your insulin and you really want to make sure that you're handling that properly, your berries are better than your fruit. You want to eat nuts from a tree. So nuts from a tree, an almond, a pecan, a walnut, a pistachio, a macadamia nut. There's some questions. Some of the guys think that cashews are okay. Some of the guys say that they're not. The cashew is really not a nut coming from a tree. It's a legume. The same thing goes for peanuts. Peanuts don't grow on a tree. They grow underground. And so there's those two things are something that you don't want to do. I would present for consideration. So go to the nuts, and then you're going to eat very little fruit. Yeah, if I can spell. And then the last thing is no sugar. You know, it's 2023, right? We've got social media. Everybody's posting stuff. There's all kinds of stuff out there that people can listen to. There's all at this point in life, like it's just like, really? Like, are we seriously talking about still eating sugar? Like, do we all not know that sugar's bad for us? And the other thing I'm going to throw out there is alcohol. And I know y'all lose you on that one, but there's at 2023, man, it's just, we should have somebody come out and say it. It's time to stop drinking alcohol. It's ridiculous. I don't know of any studies anything that says alcohol is good for you. I know some things that maybe that wine producers produce, and you got to realize that this is 2023, that you've got clean water. You can drink water. You can drink tea. You can drink coffee even if you're going to get some caffeine. But there's some things that we really ought to stop, because the alcohol is going to be metabolized in your liver, and the liver is going to cause inflammation and all kinds of problems right there. So when you're looking at the reason I wanted to finish this on the show tonight is because I had a patient today say, hey, can you help me reverse my type 2 diabetes? He's 82 years old. And I said, yes, I can. Eat this diet right here and increase your muscle mass. Increase your muscle mass so you can help control your blood sugar. then, and those are two things that you can do to get yourself back on track. I really appreciate you guys watching. I know that it's a sacrifice to do this, and I hope that it's helping you somewhere. If there's anything I can do to help you, call the office, 806-794-0400. I would love to visit with you. I've actually got a meeting tonight at 7:15, so I'm kind of busy. I started my day this morning at 6, and I've pretty much been with patients since now, and people are like, don't get burned out. I promise you I won't get burned out. I'm passionate about this. This is fun for me. This is what I do. And it's like, I don't have anything else to do between 6 and 7 anyway, but you might have to meet. If you want to meet with me, it might have to be after 7. We might have to go get some supper or something. So thank you guys. I really appreciate you. And I will see you tomorrow night.